Hi, Charles. Sorry about that. I can see and hear you fine now. We have actually started the event a little early, but if we give it a couple of minutes to start at 12 o'clock on the dot.
Thanks, Imogen. I'll wait a few minutes before getting started.
I think if you're ready now, Charles, we can get going.
Thank you, Imogen, and welcome everyone to this lunchtime webinar on measuring and managing sustainability for construction plant and equipment. So this webinar is run by myself. I'm a consultant at Action Sustainability. We're the organization that run and operate the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I, as part of my role, lead the delivery of the sustainability tool, which is a performance management and reporting software application that is owned by Action Sustainability. Today, I'm supported by Imogen Player, one of my fellow consultants at Action Sustainability, who does a lot of work on the Supply Chain Sustainability School, notably on offsite. She is also a consultant who provides the delivery of a sustainability tool to various clients in the construction industry. So today we're going to look at reporting and performance management within the context of plant and equipment. This is in line with the work that we're doing with the plant group, with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. The agenda today is to look at what is sustainability performance management generically, and then honing down into what it means in plant and equipment. So we'll be looking at specific KPIs to effectively manage your sustainability performance for plant and equipment or machinery, with a focus on carbon. And we'll go into the final section of this webinar by looking at the reporting tool that I run, and how that can apply across carbon. So without further ado, what is performance management? There are three key components to efficiently managing performance. The first one is the measurement phase. So that's really about the collection or the logging and aggregation of relevant data. It can be done so by members of your internal teams, or your project teams, but also of your supply chain, depending on the level of granularity that you're looking to get. The data can be either reported manually, or also it can be reported automatically. Perhaps it can be captured by existing systems, and we can see that technology is enabling more and more of that to happen, whereby data is collected automatically. Once you aggregate it, the next phase is what we call the report or the redaction. That's once you've done the aggregation, is putting it together and making an analysis of your data. It's a summary of what you've achieved, and how you're faring against your targets. Typically, what we see is by organizations that is done in either in Excel reports, where it's sort of more data heavy, or also we can have sort of glossy PDFs in the shape of sustainability reports for organizations or for projects. That is often aligned with communication strategies. For a good example of a report, I recommend that you look at what British Land is doing. It's if you go to their website, you can see that on their in their sustainability pages, you can access to their sustainability report, and that's a good example of that. What's particularly interesting there is the level of detail that they provide from their collection phase, so you can really go down and see the type of data that they're collecting. The final sort of component of effective or efficient performance management is the actual action. What do you do on the back of your collection and redaction? And that is taking actions based on your data and your analysis. On the one hand, you can take corrective measures if you're failing against some targets or commitments. And on the other hand, you can take sort of more investigative measures to try to understand why things have gone well when they have, and perhaps write case studies about those, so you can take lessons learned and build from them. One thing to note is that performance management for sustainability isn't just limited to environmental aspects, although we'll focus on that today. It can be across the board. You can manage performance for all your social and economic commitments as well. And really, that's what we recommend as an organization, is to try and understand sort of your performance management and look at it from a holistic point of view. So essentially, you should use performance management to not only understand, but to improve your sustainability impacts that are of significance throughout your activities. In terms of driving trends, why performance management is becoming more and more important is fully aligned with why sustainability is becoming more important. Companies are being held more accountable. I think society at large is seeing the responsibility and the role that businesses have to play in tackling sustainability, and so they're asking organizations to be transparent, which is where the reporting performance management comes in. Reporting is really for that transparency aspect, and then the performance management is for the improvement aspects. Also, in the work that we do, we're seeing that business decision makers are increasingly understanding that their organizations have a moral duty to take action. But on top of that, there are also business benefits to be gained. Technology in the last few years has really enabled the performance management or reporting to take place. We're seeing that with systems that are logging information automatically, we're getting very granular information, particularly in the space of or in the field of carbon. And really, it's thanks to that technology that we're sort of able to progress as an industry when we're collecting data and going down into the granularity of data. I'll show you the sustainability tool that I run for Action Sustainability. And in that, you'll see that it's evident that technology is enabling us to capture information from deeper into the supply chain than ever before. So really, it's enabling organizations to go not just from their direct impacts, but looking at those of sort of their wider impacts through their suppliers. Managing risks again is why reporting is important. That's around staying ahead of the curve and making sure that you've got the data and you're fully informed to ensure business continuity. Again, both internally and throughout your supply chain, and also. We're seeing that more and more organizations on contracts or on projects are being incentivized to report their information and being able to demonstrate concrete improvements on their sustainability commitments. And that can work with incentives, but it can also work with penalties as well if you don't achieve your commitments. As a result, I would say that performance management is just as much about managing those business and sustainability risks. There are trends in the market that we're seeing. Both micro and macro trends that are pushing sustainability being reported and for that data to be sort of publicly available. Particularly when we look at plant and machinery or plant and equipment, we're seeing that organizations have a requirement to report against the air quality impacts that they're having. More widely, we could look at a trend in the last few years was plastics. It sort of suddenly came up, and we suddenly saw organizations reporting the amount of plastics, single-use plastics that they're using, etc. And then finally, there's regulatory compliance. There's regulatory compliance, obviously, on sustainability, but specifically on reporting as well. In the EU since 2018, large organizations have to disclose non-financial information. And then there are several sort of reporting frameworks that are being adopted by organizations, and by doing so, they're getting sort of a stamp of accreditation that they're really making an effort and progress on sustainability through their reporting and performance management. In terms of other drivers, when we look at specifically at construction plant and equipment, I'm highlighting here three sort of key trends that are driving the importance of getting baseline data and being able to act on it and improve. Obviously, first and foremost is the climate crisis. Through CPE, we're consuming fossil fuels, right? And in total, that represents around 2% of UK greenhouse gas emissions, which is equivalent to about 10 million tons of CO2. That's, I believe, an example is that equates to around 300,000 homes being powered for the year. So it's quite a large amount of carbon emissions that this space and construction is producing. And so therefore one that we definitely want to sort of tackle as much as possible and find efficiencies where possible. Next is air quality. Through our plant and equipment, we're contributing to poor air quality. This is less of a global issue, the greenhouse gases are, but it's a local issue whereby we're affecting our workforce and also the local community in terms of generating poor air quality close by to our construction sites. So 16% of PMs, which are particulate matters, nitrous oxides, are generated by construction plant and equipment. That's through the combustion of sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides, and it creates sort of these microscopic solids and liquids that are so small they're in the air, we don't see them, and as human beings, people, we breathe them in, and then they go into our respiratory and bloodstreams, and are very harmful to our health. They're carcinogenics. So again, that's evidently something that we need to try and tackle as much as possible and keep a focus on. And then if we look over sort of related to that, to health and safety, obviously the air quality issue is a health and safety issue at the same time. And then on top of that, there's also the sort of more physical injuries, sort of less long-term health, but immediate physical injuries that workers are suffering of, and also the public that are related to CPEs, construction plant and equipment, and that represent quite a large number of injuries that we're seeing in our workplace. So those are three key trends that we need to address, that as an industry we're sort of getting pressure on. So coming back to performance management, the process rather than the drivers, we recommend sort of a very well-known process in 4 steps, which is the plan, do, check, act model. So we start off on the top right-hand side with plan, and go do, check, act, and it's a virtual circle. So we go back to plan once we finish sort of one iteration of going through the circle. So I would recommend for you in your performance management and reporting activities that you follow this process. So planning, what does that entail? We start off by defining a strategy, and that's really understanding as an organization or as a project, what are your sustainability strategies or priorities and goals. And there you need to understand who your stakeholders are, why you're doing this, and what's material to you as an organization. Once you've done that and you've understood your strategy, what your longer term goals are, you can then move into, well, how are we going to measure that? And you can do that by first of all creating indicators. So those are the KPIs, right, that you need to put together, that you will have goal targets against, and you will be able to measure how you perform against those indicators over time. Those indicators are built by what we call metrics. So metrics is the actual data that you need to collect to be able to calculate the indicators, and we'll go into more of those later on. And then once you have that, obviously, don't forget to also identify what your targets are, and try to sort of plan those over time, see what their profile looks like over time. So what your baseline is, and how you where you want to evolve to, and what are the steps doing that. In terms of a planning phase, you also need to establish a process for performance management. There's a process around the reporting, the measurement, the reporting, and the managing of the progress. And as part of putting together a process, you also need to understand the tools that you're putting together. Most commonly, up to now, we've seen organizations use spreadsheets or sort of iterations of spreadsheets for collecting, reporting data. As you expand that out, and as you try and get more granular data throughout your organizations and your supply chain, try to think what's the most adequate tools that you can use. And there are a variety of tools out there based on that can help you with various aspects of your reporting, if not all. When I refer to tools, I'm mainly referring to software applications that help you to do that and help with the process. So I suggest that you explore those. In the planning, you also need to define your roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible for reporting information, whether it's internal to my teams, is it someone with boots on the ground, or is it project managers, and then within my supply chain as well. And when you do that, also think, well, who has the skills to do this as well. So make sure that when you're planning, you're planning adequately what needs to be done for people based on their roles. If they need to report information, and make sure that they understand what it is they need to report and they know where to get that information from. And if need be, upskill them in doing this. Roles and responsibilities could be, so I've mentioned reporting, but there could be sort of reviewing and approving data, doing the analysis, redacting, etc., and make sure you have all of that established and that everyone understands the whole context of your performance management process. And then finally, in the planning, also determine your frequency. So there's a frequency around how frequently you want to collect data. Is it you want data to be collected all the time, right, through your energy management softwares, or do you want your supply chain to report data monthly or biannually, etc.? And then understand how often you want to analyze that and report that, and then take action on the back of that. Is it 6 monthly reviews, yearly reviews, etc.? And the work that I do, we recommend that organizations most typically do that on a monthly or quarterly basis. What you don't want to do is overburden the data collection process. So don't do it too frequently, right? Daily would be too much. But do it sort of frequently enough that you can quite early on identify if you're not going to meet targets and take corrective measures when required. Then you can move on to your next phase once you've done the planning, and that's the doing. Essentially, in performance management, the doing is actually collecting data. Or, you're doing that yourself, or your supply chain is doing that for you, and then monitoring that information, monitoring that you're actually getting it, making sure that process is streamlined. Then you can go to the check, which is really just measuring your data and calculating from the metrics data that you've collected, calculating your indicators, your KPIs, and how you're performing against those. Obviously, in relation to targets that you would have set in the planning phase. And there was an opportunity to sort of analyze the performance, to measure the value that you've provided through this exercise, and to identify areas where you can take action. Which leads us on to the final phase, which is acting, and that's really trying to, from the information that you've collected, trying to make a change, right? So you want to use the results to influence decisions within your organizations that will help to improve performance. You then want to trying to implement some of the decisions that are taken to deliver new benefits and to try and do better than you have done. And then you want to continuously report on that, and sort of discuss findings with the key stakeholders. Once you finish your acting sort of for the first iteration, you then go back to planning, see if there's anything that you need to change, and so on, and you go back through this cycle, which should enable you to make continuous improvement throughout your organization. So now that we've determined what performance management is and reporting is, and put that into context, let's look at how we put together KPIs for CPE. So there are a few things that you need to keep in mind when you put together KPIs. And first of all, it's the use of a common language. What you want to make sure is that throughout your organization, throughout your supply chain, you're using a common language that everyone will understand. You need to define that correctly. To do that, there's a clear hierarchy, which was sort of touched upon in the process phase, which is around starting with your goals. So that's tends to be sort of longer term objectives that your organization has. For example, we want to be carbon neutral by 2025. Or we want to divert all waste from landfill by 2021, as examples. So you start off with your goal that's linked with your business and your commercial strategy. You then have your targets, what you're wanting to achieve. So here you can see on the slide proposing a target of 90% waste diverted from landfills. So I said 100, but let's stick with 90. Then from that, what your indicator is, your KPI. So it's what is your percentage of waste diverted from landfill, and therefore what are your metrics? How do you break down that indicator? What information do you need to be able to calculate that? In this instance, we would have total waste diverted from landfill divided by total waste generated times 100 to get a percentage. We could then sort of break down that further, right? What is total waste generated? Break it down further for those who are reporting into different types of waste streams, etc., and that can actually help us for further analysis. But the key thing here is that there's a definition at each step of these that really defines, what your goals are, what your targets are, what your indicators are, and what your metrics are. When we implement reporting performance management sort of frameworks within organizations, with the metrics, we provide additional definitions that really sort of try and write down in layman's terms exactly what an individual is required or a system is required to provide or collect in terms of data. Just to make sure that everyone uses the same definition. If you go to one organization and talk about total waste, it might have a different scope to what another organization has. This is particularly true for carbon, where we have different scopes, and one organization might talk about their carbon footprint, that only comprises their scope 1 and scope 2, while another organization would include a good bulk of their scope 3 in that. So you really need to define it within your organization and the context that you're working in, and make sure that you disseminate that throughout your supply chain, and actually upstream as well to your clients or other stakeholders who are interested in the information, so that they know specifically what your information you're providing to them, and they can see that you're fully transparent. You wouldn't want them to sort of think that you're reporting against scope 3 carbon emissions when you're not. They might turn around later and say the information you're providing to them was misleading if you haven't clarified that. So as an organization, when you put together your performance management plans in place, try and sort of each goal have at least one target, if not more than one. And then for each target, you have an indicator. And then for each indicator, you have one or several metrics that enable you to report that. And then within the metrics, you might break those down into sort of more granular data, just so that you can sort of analyze the data more efficiently later on. But essentially, make sure you have this recorded somewhere for each of your goals, so that as an organization how many KPIs you have, etc., and all the things that you're working against. And so at any one time you can sort of view how you're making progress. A few things when putting KPIs together to not forget. There's determining your baseline. So that's when you're looking at implementing targets, make sure that you have historical data to sort of go against. It's not just random targets that you're putting together, but something that's realistic based on historic performance. When we're looking at carbon and air quality, have sort of about 6 months at least worth of data to go by before starting to implement targets, because otherwise you're sort of shooting in the dark. Establishing the reporting frequency, which I mentioned earlier on, and really it's the implications of that. If you're asking your project teams or your supply chain to report every couple of weeks, or every day, it becomes quite a burden, right? And actually it becomes a resource and a burden, and therefore you need to think about that, and what are the payoffs between getting sort of almost daily data against getting monthly data or yearly data, etc. And then again, you need to think about the reporting frequency within the context of how short-term or long-term your goals are. If you've got a strategy to implement some, to achieve a carbon in your a target, sorry, on your carbon reduction commitments by next year, then you probably need data more frequently than yearly, because in a year, if you only get your data once a year, you can only act upon it once a year in any significant way, because that's only when you have the information and that you're informed that you can act on it efficiently. As I mentioned before, explore the tools and resources to support the process, software applications, workshops for upskilling that you need to provide for your employees or your colleagues or your supply chain. Defining your stakeholders is a key one as well. It's understanding who you're going to report to. Earlier on, I mentioned sort of reporting frameworks like the UN SDGs or the UN Principles for Responsible Investments, etc. If your stakeholders are expecting you to report within those frameworks, and make sure that your data collection and performance management strategy is aligned to how the information that those frameworks expect from you. And then again, trying to make sure that your process is as transparent as your stakeholders will expect you to be, and as granular as they'll expect you to be. And as I mentioned in the last slide, use a common language. I can't repeat that enough, just to make sure that people aren't interpreting the information you're asking from them or the information you're reporting in different ways. Really, this helps with transparency, and it helps avoid data reporting errors, etc. So really try and use a common language and define where possible. At the Supply Chain Sustainability School, we have a plant group. That group gets together and discusses what can be improved in relation to sustainability for plant organizations, right? Construction, plant, and equipment. And there are sort of 5 key areas that are being focused on. First of all, it's air quality. So we're consuming fossil fuels to power our plant and equipment, and we're generating sort of local impacts on air quality through those combustions, through the generation of nitrous oxides and hydrocarbons, and that particularly matters, PM 2.5s and PMs 10. And that's having health impacts on the workforce and community. So as an organization in this space, would strongly suggest that you also look at air quality as one of sort of your strategic priority areas. Second of all, there's the climate crisis and fuel burning of fossil fuels. We're generating carbon emissions, greenhouse gases. What can be done about that is obviously the efficiency of the equipment that we're using, the vehicles that we're using, and also how we operate them. So making sure that the vehicles are idling, that their equipment is being used efficiently. We always like to say, don't put your foot down, right? Because that's when you're being the less efficient, etc. So and from that, the main sources are, the petrol, the diesel, and the electricity consumption that you're using to power all this equipment. Health and safety. Obviously, there's air quality impacts, but then otherwise, there's the health and safety issues that arise from inadequate use of plant and equipment, and equipment that's hazardous as well, that hasn't been maintained properly, etc. So you need, as an organization, to make sure that you have commitments against that, and that you keep that as a strategic priority area to keep your workers or your local community safe, and therefore think about what you can do to ensure that. Resource consumption. So the main resource you use here is for oils and lubricants for machinery. So you need to understand, well, what impact is that having, and how can you reduce that as much as possible through your use of plant and equipment. And finally, sort of linked to that is biodiversity. There are leaks that happen and contaminate water, local water causeways, and that needs to be addressed as well, and can be a strategic priority area for you. Not addressing these can lead to sort of, risks for your organization, particularly reputational risks. So looking at indicators, what can we build from those? So obviously, building indicators has to be within the context of your organization, the work that you're doing. If you're using or leasing vehicles as opposed to sort of handheld tools, there's going to be a difference in terms of how you want to measure your performance and build the key KPIs. So if we look at air quality, you could think about, well, how am I trying to avoid using sort of petrol generated or diesel generated equipment, and maybe look at sort of the percentage of battery powered tools. In terms of climate change, you could look at your percentage of vehicles that are accredited FORS, for example, and then how many is silver or gold. Health and safety, looking at the percentage of training hours completed by workforce. Resource consumption, suggesting tons of motor oil used per hour of CPE operation. And then biodiversity is number of reported fuel leaks. So these are just examples. They're by no means gospel. What you can tell from some of them is that I've got percentages in there. So obviously percentages tend to be much more meaningful than absolute numbers. So if one of your KPIs is just the number of battery powered tools, sort of, then a number is out of context. 500 could mean a lot for an organization. It could mean sort of very little for another. So a percentage is always probably a better way, if possible, to report your information, as it gives you sort of the context. Some idea of the context within which you're implementing this, or the scale, sorry, within which you're implementing this. The other thing is, if we look at the indicator of tons of motor oil used per hour of CPE operation, here we're using per hour to give us sort of better information as well on how efficient we are in terms of our use of motor oil. The training one's an interesting one because it's actually just showing activity. It's not necessarily showing impact, but on some metrics, impact or some sort of strategic areas, impact can be quite hard to judge, and so or the impacts of activities, corrective measures that you're taking place might have a lag, might take time to sort of have effects. So keeping sort of some indicators, some KPIs whereby they reflect the level of activity or effort you're putting into a certain strategy area can also be a good idea to sort of help show progress and really sort of keep your sustainability strategy moving and yourself sort of motivated against that. So there you go. Number of reported fuel leaks. Really here, there I'm suggesting an indicator that's an absolute indicator. It's not a percentage. So if I told you 1, you might not know whether that's a lot or not. But fuel leaks are sort of they're of concern. So essentially, when you want your number to be 0 all the time, like deaths on site, for example, in those instances, it's okay just to report absolute numbers, because even just 1 will be of importance and will require corrective action. So it doesn't necessarily need to be number of percentage of reported fuel leaks by hours spent on site, for example. And so there you go. So here I'm just providing sort of a set of examples of indicators that you might want to build within each of those strategic areas within the context of CPE. Obviously, you should sort of have more than one KPI under each strategic area. And then within each KPI, what you would need to do is, as I said earlier on, break that down into, well, what are my metrics, and also implement your targets against each of those. There's no sort of industry standard that you can do. You have to understand as an organization how far you're willing to go in terms of your targets, how many KPIs you'd like to measure yourself against, and sort of the benefits versus the efforts, right? That will generate. I would say that you can't sort of have all the KPIs in the world, because then you're sort of measuring yourself against too much. So really keep what's material to your organization, what's really important, and just try and focus on that. So what I'll do now is I'll move into just the final piece of this lunchtime webinar, and that's just around show you a practical example of how to manage sustainability performance through a software application. I'll show you the sustainability tool that Action Sustainability commercialize. We actually offer this tool to the supply chain partners and community for measuring as a community, our carbon emissions. So I'll show you an example of that. The tool is a web-based software application. You can access it if you have a login. The key principle is that as a organization, what you can set up is define your key strategic areas in sustainability that you have commitments against, build KPIs, build what metrics you need against those, and then who needs to report that information, whether within your organization or through your supply chain. Once you've done that, those individuals who need to report information can actually log into the tool and report their data, whether manually or by integrating with sort of other systems that capture that required information automatically. And then all of that feeds into dashboards where organizations can see, well, in real time, their KPIs and how they're progressing against those KPIs and measured against their targets. So I'll share my screen to show you what that looks like. I'll start off by showing an input screen. So here what you're seeing is a report to. So essentially, we're in the climate action group, which is a working group. It's led by the Supply Chain Sustainability School that's used to enable all the suppliers within our school community to report their carbon emissions. When you're set up as a supplier, you essentially are invited to every quarter, in this instance, report information that will be used to calculate your carbon emissions automatically. In this instance, I'm reporting, as you can see here, for the last quarter of 2020. This is a demo account. And what I have on the left-hand side is all the metrics that I need to report against. And we can see all of those listed here. And that information, if I fill it in, will automatically calculate the carbon emissions of my organization. What we can note is some of these metrics have little information icons, and those are the extra additional definitions that I was referring to that really sort of specify exactly what we're looking for, what data you need to report against, so there's no ambiguity. The units, obviously, is something that has to be defined as well. So what we need to report the data in. Here you can enter your data. So here I'm going to enter in average car diesel, how many miles were traveled by my organizations in vehicles owned by my organization within this quarter. So let's say as an organization, we drove 5,000 miles in diesel cars that are owned by my organization. As I input that, my carbon emissions are automatically sort of tallying up and being calculated and so on. If I then go below, I can put average car hybrid. Again, I put mileage in there, and this is owned by my organization. I can see that it's here. If I'm not sure what a hybrid is, I can look at the definitions and it explains that. Um, I'll put 3,000 miles and we can see my carbon emissions automatically calculated, etc. and so on. What we look at is obviously travel and logistics and company owned vehicle, which falls under your carbon scope 1 emissions. The next section is around fossil fuels used on sites. So the different fossil fuels you might use. Again, this could be just as relevant for your plant and equipment. And here are the different types of fossil fuels that you might use, and then how many units of those in liters where required, in tons, in kilowatt hours, and so on. And you can fill that out. So I'll put 1,000 liters of biodiesel, and we can see the tons of carbon emissions that are automatically calculated for that section there, and so on. Next section is around fugitive emissions. So that's leaks that I was referring to earlier on, and we can see all of that. It's reported in tonnage. Obviously, if I just report 1 ton of that, a lot of these are very, very potent gases. So we can see that the tons of carbon emissions are very, very high, 3,500 tons for just 1 ton of HFC 125 that's been emitted, and so on. If there's anywhere where I don't have information or it was 0, I can just leave those cells blank. I can also add a comment as well to provide more data to the client who I'm reporting to. I might say accident on site led to this, right, to provide a bit more context when they see this, and so on. Next section is around carbon scope 2 emissions, so total electricity consumption. We can see here electricity consumption for electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and then the grid electricity consumption, right, that we pay for our energy bill. I'll put 5,000 kilowatt hours in this last quarter, and calculates tons of carbon emissions. And then if I go down, we move into sort of carbon scope 3. Here again, travel in vehicles that are not used, that are not owned by my organization. So there's a difference when calculating your carbon emissions between vehicles that are owned by your organization and traveling vehicles that are not owned by your organization. So in this instance, I'll put average van diesel, and I'll put let's say 600 miles just here, and it again tallies up my carbon emissions for that section. The last section, probably less relevant to plant and equipment hire or use, is materials use. And here you can have your sort of different types of materials that you're using. But then again, if you're using equipment to work on these materials, and use how much of those you've used in this period. What I would do as an organization is just submit that data in the tool. You actually submit it for approval, and someone goes to check that. So just put a comment there that it's demo data. There we go. Ask me to confirm, but I'm happy to report this information. I'm not going to do that just here, but as it's a demo account. But if I were to do that, then this information would be sent over for approval, and then once it's done that, you would then see a dashboard where my carbon emissions have been calculated, and I can see that broken down here. I'm just looking at carbon, and I can see that broken down into different KPIs that I predetermined. And what we can see is that there are some colors. This actually uses a red, amber, green approach, whereby red, I'm failing on my targets, green, I'm hitting them, amber, I'm sort of somewhere in between. Anywhere that's gray, I'm just recording the data for informational purposes, and I haven't set a target yet. I might do in 6 months' time or something when I've got more baseline data to help me do that. So the tool can help you do all of these things. Here I'm just focusing on carbon to show you some of the work that we're doing throughout the supply chain school, and what you can access for free. This tool, however, does work across other sustainability issues. So earlier on, we were talking about air quality. So if you'd like to report information against that and share that with your clients, you can do that. But that's in the that's with the commercial product, and not the free version that the supply chain school provides. when I look at these indicators, if I click on one of them, I actually get a table below that shows me my cumulative performance month over month. Here we can see data for each quarter. So to March 31st, 2020, to June 30th, 2020, to September 30th, 2020. And then we can see how we've progressed over time. And then what we can see, so that's in the bar graphs. And then um, there's a line there that's showing our target and where we want to be. Obviously, here we're looking at carbon emissions, so we want to be below the line. In this last quarter, we're above the line. We're above this green line, right? Our target was at 900, and we're actually at 1,000 tons. Which is an issue, right? So that's why we're red. We're emitting more than we wanted to. In the second quarter, we were just below that line, so we actually this tile would have been green. If I go to total carbon emissions, we can see it's green, and we can see in the last quarter we're under the target that we've set, and we can see how that target's progressed over time and how we've been underneath it. So actually, in this instance, our total carbon emissions are good, but we're emitting too much fossil fuels on site based on the objectives that we set for our organisation, and so on. Here I'm just showing you a really quick sort of simple version of that so you can understand how tools can help you with sort of getting information from your supply chain being reported, and then how that can feed back up into dashboards. These dashboards can be broken down by sort of your different suppliers or your different contracts that you have, etc. And vice versa. You can sort of not only use it to manage your project teams or your supply chain, but you can also use it to share this type of information and give live interactive dashboards to your clients so that they can see how you're performing against KPIs that they might have set for you in their contracts on projects that you have with them. So there you go. So I'll stop sharing now. Just go back to my slides. So what next? First of all, thank you for attending this this lunchtime webinar. I think what you can do next is two things. First of all, we've got a plant group with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. You can find more information about this plant group online if you go to the website. And go to the partners menu, and you'll see that there are groups that we refer to. So there's one against the plants group. What we have within the plant group are two things that I suggest you go and read. First of all, we have a plant charter, which shows commitments from plant organizations to minimize their impact on mainly on carbon and air quality through the use of through their more efficient use of plant and equipment and construction. The plant charter is accompanied by a minimum standards commitment that you sort of sign up to when you're a signatory of the plant charter, and that details sort of what levels of and what types of equipment you should be using. It really goes into the details of that. Euro standards is used for road-going vehicles, and then NRMM, so the non-road mobile machinery regulations for other plant and equipment. There's also details around what you should achieve against the fleet operator recognition scheme FORS. So I encourage you to go into that and then try and look at the minimum requirements that are laid out in those documents against what you're currently doing as an organization, so that you can see where you fit within the industry. As a reminder, the ones that are published are a minimum requirement that you would be signing up to. So really try and sort of see where you are. And then the other thing that I recommend you do is also go to our website and look at the Climate Action Group. Climate Action Group was set up, as I mentioned, to help you to record information in relation to your use of fossil fuels, of energy, etc., of materials, and automatically calculate your carbon emissions from that. And then the overall goal is for anyone to be able to report their emissions, then to apportion that to your various clients who would also be signed up to this tool. We've got all the supply chain sustainability school partners who have got an account in this, so you can apportion your carbon emissions once they're calculated to them based on the percentage of turnover that they represent for you. And then the idea is that they will then identify hotspots in which suppliers are emitting the most, etc., and then work with you to try and reduce your carbon emissions, because your carbon emissions as a supplier go into their scope 3 emissions and so on. So they have a responsibility in helping you reduce your carbon emissions. So it's a real opportunity to engage with your clients, or vice versa with your suppliers, in trying to reduce our overall industry's carbon emissions. So there you go. If you go online, you'll find information in terms of who to contact, how to sign up. We run webinars and workshops to help you get set up and report your information through the tool, and all of that is free. So there you go. And otherwise, if you're interested in the wider reporting tool to record information like health and safety, your impact on air quality, biodiversity, and so on, then feel free to get in touch with me. So thank you very much. What I'll do right now is I'll look at questions and try and answer them in the brief time that there is. But if I don't have time to do that, then please feel free to reach out either directly to me or use the info@supplychainschool.co.uk email address. Should have said I'll put my email address in the public chat, so you can have access to that. Write that now before I forget. It's charles.naud@actionsustainability.com. Thank you. So I'll look through some questions. So how would you recommend recording fuel use from plant and equipment without installing tech? So that's one question. Obviously, for fuel use, I mean, you need to record and keep a log of the amount of fuel and the type of fuel that you're recording. If you're not installing technology to do that, then you have to do that manually. I mean, the first place I would go to is your procurement teams, who probably have a good handle on the quantities of fuel that you're consuming, because you're paying for that. And then in terms of maybe being able to apportion that or break that up by project or client, if you don't have that granularity of data, then make an estimate of it based on the percentage of turnover that each project or client represents for your organization. It might not be sort of 100% exact science, but actually carbon reporting never is. There's always a part of estimation. So it's better to start with that data, being clear about some of the assumptions that you've made, and sharing that with your clients or your other stakeholders accordingly. Another question was around how to gain access to the recording tool. That's by registering to the Carbon SIG. So if you go on the Supply Chain School website, you'll find all the details there. Otherwise, email me directly, and I'll direct you to my colleague who will help you get set up and make sure that you undertake the relevant training to be able to do that. Thank you. Imogen, I don't know if you've seen any other questions. Sorry, I can see one more. Does the sustainability tool take account of measures taken towards low carbon or renewables? Yes, absolutely. I mean, the tool that I showed you can be configured really in any way. We configure it from scratch for every single client to make sure that we're recording the information, or that the tool is recording the information and measuring the KPIs that are relevant to them. And if part of that is understanding, well, what percentage of my electricity consumption comes from renewables, then can do that, or or recording sort of percentage of low carbon alternatives in terms of equipment, so battery equipment instead of sort of combustion engine equipment, or naked products, as we call them as such, that you have on site, etc.
That's great. Thanks, Charles. I think that's all we've got time for at the minute. But if you have any more questions, then Charles's email will also be in the follow-up email, so you can get his contact details there. I would just ask that when you exit your browser, you just complete the very short 2-minute feedback form from this event. So otherwise, thanks very much for attending, and thanks very much, Charles. That was really interesting.
Thank you, Imogen. Thank you, everyone.